I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds and welcome to my horror house. Let's talk vampires. Let's talk about what to my mind are the best vampires in all fiction, the vamps that appear in Brian Lumley's series of Necroscope books. Necroscope, the first book, was published in 1986 and the series has run through to the 20-teens, I think. Brian Lumley introduced a new kind of vampire to the horror landscape, the Vamphyri. And within these books, Lumley positions them as the original vampires, the source of all our myths, books, comics and films about vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters and zombies. The secrets of the Vamphyri are revealed slowly over time with each successive book. The first book, for example, Necroscope, only features the consciousness of a single long dead and buried vampire, and that poses enough of a threat to make it a formidable foe. In the second book, Necroscope 2, Vamphyri, we're introduced to our first thrall, dangerous enough in its own right as a patient zero of a possible pandemic. And then we get to my personal favourite, Necroscope 3, The Source. The world of the Vamphyri is illuminated even further. We learn of their origins, much more of their powers and culture, which is then massively expanded upon in the Vampire World trilogy. Number 1, Blood Brothers. These are doorstops. Number 2, The Last Eerie, and number 3, Blood Wars. If you know nothing of the Vamphyri and Brian Lumley's Necroscope series, I highly recommend reading the books and letting these mysteries reveal themselves as the author intended. Safe to say, though, that Lumley rewrote the rules of vampires and created something familiar yet starkly original, scary, and practically unstoppable. At its heart, a Vamphyri is a symbiote, a bonding of a parasite and a host, where the host can be human or animal. But let's start at the beginning. We start with a fungus, something similar to a mushroom, formed out of the decomposed flesh and fats of a dead vampire. Okay, so right now this sounds like a paradox, a chicken and egg situation. How can a fungus be the start of the vampire when it grows from the remains of a vampire? You're right, but seeing as vampires are just one strand of a series which involves teleportation, Cold War, psychic espionage, the teeming consciousnesses of all the Earth's dead and an alien world, you'll have to trust me when I tell you that Lumley squares that particular circle. So, we have a fungus which releases spores that can be inhaled or absorbed through the skin. Think of the similar infection vector in Alien Covenant and you've got a fantastic idea of what we're talking about. Once absorbed, those spores will develop inside a host body into a leech-like parasite, the beginnings of the Vamphyri. If you get a leech inside you, you'll slowly gain in strength, size and psychic ability, and once bonded, the resulting creature will become more than the sum of its two parts. Your lifespan will increase dramatically, as will your ability to heal. But this bargain puts an enormous strain upon your body and metabolism, driving you to require fresh blood and flesh, and driving an almost uncontrollable desire to sate all of your fleshly urges. Appetites of all kinds are increased beyond measure. Over time, you'll become less and less human, and the metamorphosis into Vamphyri is practically inevitable. If you take physical damage, your damaged flesh will be replaced by metamorphic flesh. We'll talk more about that later, but basically over time, your human body will slowly give way to new vampire flesh. As Vamphyri, you can create new vampires in a number of ways with a number of different effects. The one that we're all familiar with, you can infect a person by direct transmission of bodily fluids. They will then become your thrall. That's by bite, blood, saliva, all the ways you'd expect from the books and movies that we all know and love. But you can also slip a little piece of your own metamorphic flesh, even a microscopic portion, into someone's food and drink, and they will inevitably become bonded to you as the transformation takes hold. You've created a thrall. A thrall is psychically bonded to their creator. They have heightened strength, healing and psychic abilities. They're very much akin to the vampires we see in most of our vampire books and films. In Lumley's universe, these are the lowest vampires in the ladder of hierarchy. A Vamphyri can procreate in the more accepted sense, shagging, and create a blood son or blood daughter, vampires who are born, not made. And finally, each leech, the parasite inside you, can create a single egg. The leech is nothing if not tenacious on its grip of existence, survival. It will do everything in its power to ensure the survival of the host, which is why it will continually replenish your dead and dying flesh. However, in cases where the host is damaged beyond repair, the leech may abandon it and look for another host, but outside the host body, it's extremely vulnerable. And as a last resort, at point of death, the leech will produce an egg, which upon touch is instantly absorbed, bonded to a new host, and will develop into a new leech. Any person infected in this way, bonding with an egg, will skip any thrall stage and become what is known as an egg son or egg daughter. A Vamphyri egg is offered as a great honour, a turbocharged rite of succession, which will take a host from human to Vamphyri in short order, even speedier than a blood son or blood daughter who has to grow and mature. Vamphyri are known for creating other things, not just progeny, either deliberately or accidentally. Aside from thralls, the Vamphyri can create warriors, metamorphic gas beasts and siphoneers. These creatures are sometimes accidents where a vampire attempts to feed out of desperation on an animal and the animal escapes, or an animal becomes infected by spores or a leech or an egg. At other times, they are deliberate acts of breeding a creature for a specific purpose. These infected accidental animals are the basis for our earthly myths of werewolves and shape changers, and will never become full Vamphyri. An animal body just can't handle the stress that the leech puts on its body, so there will only ever be temporary hosts for a leech. In the Vampire World trilogy, however, there is a werewolf-like Vamphyri lord whose leech ancestry clearly contains some wolf DNA, so you get weird kind of vampire-werewolf crossovers. The Vamphyri create warriors for battle, about the size of a small tank. They have armoured hides, multiple legs with pincers, claws, tentacles, teeth. They can fly using gas bladders. Think of a kind of flying crab octopus killing machine. Vamphyri also make flyers, which are more like manta rays, and they too can fly using gas bladders. They're used to transport Vamphyri lords and ladies as well as thrall troops. The Vamphyri lords and ladies live in Ares, huge tower-like constructions on the dark side of their home planet, practically impregnable mini-cities. Think of medieval castles dotted around clusters of fiefdoms, all run by psychotic monsters, housing thralls and lieutenants and an entire infrastructure designed to bolster the power base of its master. Always on a semi-war footing, ready to defend itself against attack or rout the power base of a neighbouring lord. Inside these areas, you'll find another creation of the Vamphyri, gas beasts that are used to heat and light the places. Once human, now shaped from metamorphic flesh into huge formless cattle fed on grain to produce enormous amounts of methane that is then used to heat and light these enormous areas. Or if captured, you could find yourself turned into a siphoneer. After all, why should a Vamphyri lord build complicated plumbing for their aerie when they can just mould your body, harden, strengthen and stretch your veins and arteries to draw up water from the underground wells and enormously enlarge your heart to pump that water up and down these huge tower-like structures. When turned by a Vamphyri, there is no assurance that you will rise among the ranks of the vampire. More often than not, you are metamorphic putty in their hands. Even thralls are created mainly to act as cannon fodder under the psychic command of the Vamphyri lord or lady in the battles against their opponents. Or with most of your brains torn out so you have no higher functioning or reason, you're moulded into these sickening kind of biological technologies to make the Vamphyri lives more comfortable. You see, the Ares themselves aren't even all made out of rock or stone, not when there's a plentiful supply of humans who can be morphed and moulded over the decades into a variety of shapes and turned into the very walls of the palaces themselves. Killing one of the Vamphyri is not easy. The only way to be absolutely sure is to behead one, killing the host body, and then reduce the entire body to ash, killing the leech and preventing the possibility of any spores developing among the remains. Now, you can take an automatic machine gun to a Vamphyri for sure, and if the body, which can absorb an enormous amount of damage, if the body sustains enough damage to become no longer viable, the leech will abandon ship. But if the leech lives on, then the infection lives on. Silver does burn them. Garlic causes debilitating nausea and inflammation. Sunlight does cause the metamorphic flesh to burst into flames. If you can ever get a Vamphyri at your mercy, you might pin the leech in place inside the body, say with a wooden stake, which in this series of books is where that part of the legend comes from, preventing the leech's escape until you can thoroughly torch the body. Finally, the thing a vampire in Lumley's books fears the most is leprosy. They call it the 100 years death, as the disease will take hold, eating away at their flesh to be replaced by new flesh, which in turn will rot. A biological war of attrition, which may take centuries. Once the leech is infected, though, a very slow and painful death is assured. Vampires come in all shapes and sizes and are metaphors for all kinds of things, from apex predators who eat humans to deathless romantic love interests, whatever kind of vampire you love. Personally, for me, I think Brian Lumley's creation of the Vamphyri takes this notion of a vampire and vampire culture to the next level and is something that even since 1986, personally, I don't think's been beaten. Who are your favourite vampires? What's your favourite kind of vampire? There are no wrong answers here, but please let me know in the comment sections below.